Legends in the video game industry. When that topic comes up, who do you think of? Some of you might say John Romero, Hideo Kojima, Richard Garriott, or Warren Spector. All good choices. This video is not about them though. This video is about Tim Cain. No doubt in my mind that Tim Cain deserves the title of a video game industry legend. In a previous video, I called him one of the godfathers of Fallout, and one of my viewers corrected me. He is not one of the godfathers of Fallout. He is the godfather of Fallout. I'm not downplaying the work that other people did to help bring Fallout to life. They deserve credit and praise. This video is about the man that's responsible for Fallout, and I can't think of a better time to make a video about Tim Cain, so I'm finally putting this video out. Sources will be in the description. Please check them out. Thanks to these people, we know a lot more about Tim Cain. Now let's talk about Tim Cain, a legend in the video game industry. There's much more to Tim Cain's story than just Fallout. His journey does not start at Interplay. It starts in 1981. At this time, Tim was still in high school, and one of his friends graduated a couple of years before him. This friend found work at a company called Pegasus Software. Pegasus Software was having trouble developing one of their games. Luckily for them, Tim had programming experience, so his friend recruited him to help work on the game. Tim got his first interview with the company at 15 years old, but due to his age, he wasn't hired at the time. They just waited a couple of months until he turned 16. This is a quote from RPG Codex's interview with him. "I worked at that company for the next 5 years. I graduated from high school and went to college, but I would come back and work there during the summers. They changed their name to Cybron when another company in Virginia named Pegasus claimed earlier ownership of the name, and they landed a deal with Electronic Arts to make Grand Slam Bridge. I worked on the bidding, playing, and deck maintenance code for that game, but I graduated from college and moved to California for graduate school before it shipped. I found out years later that they didn't put my name in the credits. While this disappointed me, I hadn't really planned to go into the game industry as a career. I was working on my PhD in computer science, and I planned to become a professor and work in academia. Well, that didn't happen. After I got my master's degree, I was disillusioned with academic life. So I sent my resume out to several game companies, including Interplay. They responded the fastest and they were the closest. And between my previous experience, my programming skills, and my pencil and paper RPG knowledge, I landed a contractor position making Bard's Tale construction set. He joined Interplay in 1991 as a contractor. He was a programmer for the Bard's Tale construction set, and this game was released in 1991. The Bard's Tale construction set allowed you to make your own small RPG games, similar to dungeon crawlers like Lands of Lore and Dungeon Master. As you can tell by the name, this game used the Bard's Tale engine. In 1992, Tim Cain was hired as a full employee of Interplay Entertainment, employee number 42 to be exact. The next game he worked on was a business simulation called Rags to Riches, which was released in 1993. A funny thing about Rags to Riches, Tim's co-worker was a programmer who was working on a Lord of the Rings game, while Tim was working on a business simulation game. This programmer was an economics major, and Tim Cain was a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, so naturally you'd think a company would let them trade places so they can do what they're good at. Unfortunately, this was not the case. They could not change places, and he had to finish Rags to Riches. He was a programming consultant for the 1995 game Stonekeep. It's a first-person dungeon crawler that was unique for its time due to its graphics. It used pre-rendered environments, digitized characters, and live-action cinematic sequences. Digitized characters and pre-rendered environments was a thing in the 90s. It was pretty popular. Games like Mortal Kombat, they used digitized characters, and games like Resident Evil used pre-rendered environments. It was a thing in the 90s, and Stonekeep did that in 1995. But the problem was, it was delayed several times, and the development, it was hell. There was a lot of problems, it was troublesome, it was a tough game to make. When the game was released, it got good reviews. It was nominated for Computer Gaming World's 1995 Role-Playing Game of the Year. I haven't played Stonekeep, so I can't tell you whether I think it's good or bad. The graphics, they do look cheesy now, but remember, back in 1995, this was very impressive. Here's a fun fact about Stonekeep. If you look inside the CD-ROM, there's a file called muffins.txt. This file is Tim Cain's chocolate chip pumpkin muffins recipe. Sounds pretty good. Other titles that Tim worked on for Interplay include Star Trek 25th Anniversary and Star Trek Fleet Ship Academy. He is also responsible for Fallout, but we'll get there soon. I have to talk about something else first. While working at Interplay, he made G&W. GNW is a user interface and OS abstraction library that supports Interplay titles. I listened to an interview that he did last year, and he talked about a meta installer he made. I'm not sure if these two are related. I'll just let you hear about the meta installer straight from Tim Kane's mouth.
After Rags to Riches, I just kind of got assigned to pick up here and there. I did like some stuff on Stone Keep and some stuff on Star Trek 25th, and I was making installers for a lot of other games. But what I had done was I had made an install maker. It was kind of a meta installer that you gave it the data for what it was installing, you know, how many disks and files and structures and what the target machine was. And it just made the installer. So this left me time. I started making engines in my spare time, and I made a voxel engine, I made a 3D engine, pure software. It was horrible. Then I made this little sprite engine, but I didn't have any art. So it just kind of slid little programmer art things around. And I was having a lot of fun with that. And I was also playing, I would run D&D and GURPS campaigns at night with people who, as if being at work for 8 to 10 hours a day wasn't enough, we'd stay at work for another 2 or 3 hours and play tabletop role-playing games.
The wonders of being in your 20s.
Exactly.
In early 1994, Tim Kaine started working on the game that would become his magnum opus, his crown jewel, the game that would define his career. I'm talking about Fallout. The beginning of Fallout's development was not organized at all. At first, it was just Tim Kaine working on an engine. No budgets, no plans, no staff, no estimated time of release. Not yet. Interplay gave him no tools or resources to work with. He contacted his co-workers and tried to persuade them to meet up with him after work so they can help him work on Fallout. He offered the chance to work on a brand new game from the ground up, and he ordered pizza. An important detail I made sure not to leave out. I mean, come on, it's pizza. Who doesn't love pizza? Our influences are important. It can inspire us, give us ideas, motivate us to improve and get stuff done, and it's important to mention the Fallout team's influences. The computer game influences for the Fallout team are Crusader, XCOM, Wasteland, and the Ultima series. Crusader No Remorse is an important part of Fallout's development history. This is an action game. You go through missions completing objectives in different areas. You can also use the destructible environments to your advantage. Here's a quote from Tim Kaine about Crusader. Crusader came out while we were making this game. It was one of the first 640-480 games, and it was incredibly sharp compared to the 320-200 games coming out. It was a big influence on us and one of the reasons Fallout was made.
640-480 was Crusader. Wasteland, of course, can't say this strongly enough. Fallout is very much a spiritual successor to Wasteland. Almost everybody who played the game or who worked on Fallout had played Wasteland. When we started, I had not played it. So, of course, somebody gave me a copy, said, go home this weekend. And I was addicted to it, played it all the time. It's kind of hard playing it on a more recent computer because if you've ever tried playing it, it goes too quickly. You have to put in a speed limiter. Otherwise, you shoot across the screen when you try to play. But this game had everything in it that we wanted to have in Fallout, including no strict morality like the Ultima games had. We wanted the player to be good or evil, do anything he wanted, go anywhere he wanted, and be only really restricted by how skillful he was at playing a game.
In the earliest stages of development, Fallout had a top-down XCOM-style gameplay. This was scrapped after they thought they had control of the GURPS license. The Fallout team's paper and board game influences were GURPS, WizWar, and Gamma World. Their book influences were A Canticle for Leibowitz, I Am Legend, and On the Beach. Last but not least, their movie influences are Mad Max Road Warrior, A Boy and His Dog, The Day After, Forbidden Planet, City of the Lost Children, and Logitech. And they wanted the technology in Fallout to look like what the people in the 50s thought the future was going to look like. They wanted it to look more like Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet than Terminator or RoboCop or any other type of robots. Forbidden Planet gave them some ideas. Fallout went through several changes during its development. At first they wanted to make a fantasy RPG, but they felt that the market was oversaturated with these type of games. At one point they wanted to make Wasteland 2, but they could not get the license from EA. Also, some bizarre ideas were pitched for the story. One of the ideas they had for the story involved going back in time and killing monkeys that could turn into humans, and going into the future that was ruled by dinosaurs. Sounds crazy, right? I'll let Tim explain this one.
We quickly threw that out because there were so many other fantasy games being developed, and this is the one choice we made unwittingly that actually saved us from being canceled the first time. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Our second idea was epic. You started in the modern world, you were thrown back in time, you killed the monkey that would evolve into being humans, you went through space travel, you went to the future that was ruled by dinosaurs, you were then exiled to a fantasy planet where magic took you back to the original timeline that you restored to full and came back to the modern world to save your girlfriend. It's weird even hearing me talk about it now, but we really were going to go with this. And I think one of the other producers kind of slapped me and said, there's no way you're going to get the storyline made. It's not going to get approved. You could work on it for years and no one will ever do it. I sometimes wonder what it would be like if we had done this game. And I believe Scott Campbell, the designer at the time, may still have it written down somewhere. I'd love to see it, just see what we thought was cool, 18 years ago.
Eventually, they decided to stick with a post-apocalyptic setting. A big part of Fallout is the social commentary, specifically not trusting your government. The Fallout team watched old 1950s nuclear safety videos. These videos reassured the public that everything would be okay in a nuclear war as long as you followed their silly little steps. The government told the public to hide under desks or take baths to combat radiation poisoning or a nuclear blast. In reality, the government kept the public in the dark. None of these things they taught them back in the day could keep them safe if a nuclear attack happened. You may have noticed that Vault Boy is very happy, even in terrible situations. For example, in one of the Vault Boy pictures, you see him hiding under a desk, smiling and giving the thumbs up while a nuclear blast is going off right outside the building he is in. Literally right outside. He is so close to it, and he's just so happy. There's a reason for this. It is a parody of the kids in the old government videos about nuclear attacks. The kids in these videos were unusually happy, like it was some 1950s Leave It to Beaver type video, TV show. They were just that happy. And a video about preparing for a nuclear attack. They were happy. I guess it was a way to fool the public into thinking everything would be okay if we got hit with nukes. It's not surprising that the government would do some bullshit like this. Back in the day, they would test atomic bombs and literally have soldiers near them and expose them to high levels of radiation, just because they wanted to do a test. That is so fucked up.
A big part of Fallout was you don't trust your own government. We made it quite clear that the government was lying to you, that there needs to be a check and balance, that the military needs to answer to civilians, because the military in the Fallout world pretty much took over. Corporations were taking over. I mean, you saw that the vault you were living in was built by Vault-Tec, and all the products in there were built by Vault-Tec, or a subsidiary of Vault-Tec. So your Pip-Boy, your Stealth Boy, everything was related to this one overarching, massively invasive company. We even had, inside the Fallout manual, we had a page of describing other manuals you could buy from Vault-Tec, which made light of all the horrible things that could happen after nuclear war. And basically this company was making all of its profit off of people's fear of the war, and if a war actually happened, they planned to profit off of that as well. And I think we were just trying to comment that while this is all exaggerated, a lot of this is true in our own society. I don't think anybody doubts that Halliburton profited off the Iraq War. Now it's profiting off of the BP oil spill. They just, it wouldn't hurt if that game or other games helped raise the consciousness of the players who played them just a little bit and made them look at their own governments and their own society just a little more critically.
Originally, Fallout was going to use GURPS. GURPS stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. It is a tabletop system that was created by Steve Jackson. If you're interested in this type of stuff, I suggest you look up GURPS. It's pretty interesting and it has a lot of skills. There's too much to cover for this video. Tim and the rest of the team ran into a huge problem during development. Interplay decided to not keep the license for GURPS due to disagreements with Steve Jackson. Brian Fargo explained why in a 2010 interview with Matt Barton.
And, I had strong opinions about the sensibilities for what Fallout should be, so I'd rather have we dropped out of the Steve Jackson deal and just created our own system.
He thought it was a little too violent, if I am correct about that?
Yeah, he was. I remember he saw the opening, what is most people consider to be one of the best opening cinematics of all time, which was that, with the ink spots, or what do you say, that soft music played with a violent backdrop. And he said he just wouldn't approve it. And I said, well, if you don't like that, you ain't seen nothing yet. So that was kind of the...
I agree with Brian. Fallout does have one of the best intros of all time. Just to go off topic real quick, check out Matt Barton. He runs a show called Matt Chat, and he gets interviews with so many people in the industry. Tim Cain, Brian Fargo, Chris Avallone, John Romero, and more. His channel is underrated. Go check him out. Back to Fallout. They were in a dilemma. They built this game around GURPS, and now they can't use it anymore. What do you do? At this point, Fallout was in danger of being cancelled for the second time, so the team moved quickly and Tim rewrote the combat in 2 weeks and was given another week to code it. The skill system was also redesigned with the help of Chris Taylor. GURPS was replaced with Special. Special is an acronym. Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, and Agility. Primary statistics, derived statistics, traits, and perks make up Special. There are several gameplay elements that are important in Fallout. 1. An open world where no area was restricted. The only restriction was the difficulty of enemies. It was up to you to figure out if your character is strong enough to take on whatever you wanted to. 2. A non-linear story where you are free to do whatever you want, with multiple solutions available for quest. 3. A unique take on morality where you can be good or bad or gray, and you have to take responsibility for your actions. And 4. Different endings based on your choices throughout the game. At first glance, some people might mistake Fallout as just a game that relies on violence to get your attention. That's not the case. Fallout is a game about choice and how it affects the story. It's a game about consequences. Tim Cain described Fallout as a project that has a lot of him in it. Fallout was Tim Cain's baby. He got the team together to help bring this project to life. Even when it looked like the game was going to be cancelled, the team threw themselves into the project and pulled off some amazing achievements in a short period of time. Despite all the roadblocks, especially in the beginning, Fallout was never cancelled. It was released on September 30th, 1997. Fallout takes place in the year 2161, 84 years after the Great War. The Great War was a nuclear war that happened in October of 2077. It left everything obliterated and destroyed. Humanity had to pick themselves up and rebuild civilization. In Fallout, you play as the Vault Dweller. You are a member of Vault 13. Vault 13 is the Vault Dweller's home. It's the only home he's ever known. He never experienced life outside the vault until 2161. He is sent out on a mission to collect a water chip to save the people inside the vault. Combat in Fallout is turn-based. You use special, perks, skills, and traits to make the type of character you want. There are several different factions you run into, and you can also experience special encounters where you see crazy things like a giant footprint, an alien spaceship, and more. The song that you hear in Fallout's intro is Maybe by the Ink Spots. Originally they wanted to get another song by the Ink Spots, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, but they couldn't do that. But they couldn't get it due to licensing issues. Tim Cain referred to Fallout as a cavalier oblique game, not an isometric one. I had to look up the definition and this is what I got. In this convention, the angles used are 45 degrees and 90 degrees. The only difference between the two named styles is in the scale of the dimension going away from the viewer. The first example is cavalier oblique and shows the full scale in the axis. Fallout received critical acclaim. It won GameSpot's RPG of the Year 1997. It also won Computer Gaming World's RPG of the Year 1998. It was praised for its story, world, gameplay, and characters, and being one of the shining examples of its genre. It created a passionate fanbase. Fan sites popped up. The first ever fan site for Fallout is No Mutants Allowed, and it is still up till this day, 20 years later. It is regarded by many websites and fans as one of the best RPGs of all time, and it was a breath of fresh air in a genre which was filled with fantasy games. The game was certainly a critical success, but that does not stop Tim Cain from giving his own critique. He admitted the AI is very simple, and if he could go back and change anything, he would have never put the time limit in the first part of the main quest. Luckily, they patched it out later. I don't know how many copies it sold. I looked everywhere to try to get an accurate sales figure. I just couldn't find it. Some sources said 100,000 units sold, others said 80,000. It was more of a critical success than a commercial success, but it sold enough for the higher-ups at Interplay to become believers in the series. A sequel was on its way. Interplay was a different company in 1998 compared to 1991. When Tim Cain started, he was employee number 42. In 1998, Interplay had over 600 employees. Tim didn't have the same amount of freedom that he had with Fallout. Fallout was largely ignored by the company. They were free to do what they want because Interplay focused on other games and left Fallout alone. This wasn't the case for Fallout 2. It was treated like a big deal. The higher-ups in the company wanted control over different aspects of development and marketing. These 3 quotes from Tim explain his frustration perfectly. The first quote is from an interview with RPG Codex. I left when I felt like I had lost control of Fallout. So many people took over after Fallout 1, when they changed their minds about the IP and suddenly it was a AAA game. Before Fallout 1 shipped, we had been overshadowed by D&D and Star Trek, so we were left alone to develop it our way. After it shipped, people were suddenly dictating content, box art, advertisement assets, and everything else, so I walked away from it. I was proud of the game and happy that people were so passionate about it, but I realized it wasn't mine anymore and never would be. The second quote is from a 2002 interview with duckandcover.cx. The interviewer asked him what would he do if Brian Fargo gave him the license for Fallout. This was his response. Okay, here's my multi-line response. When I finished Fallout, I was exhausted and tired of Fallout. After all, I worked on it for 3.5 years, so I gave the whole thing over to my assistant producer and started thinking of a new RPG. Well, things weren't working out. Fargo wanted me to take over. I said no. He said I owed him for the opportunity he gave me to do the first one. So I started Fallout 2, but things were still bad. People second-guessed what was good for the game, and they wanted in on it since it looked like a big thing now, not some grade B product, which was what Fallout was viewed as. So I got tired of the whole thing. I felt like I was in a dark hole, so I left. But that was 4 years ago. I have done another game and designs on 3 other games. I wouldn't mind returning to Fallout, but not with those people running it. There, I'm done. Phew. The last quote. The interviewer asked him, given that you left Interplay midway through Fallout 2's development, how did the resulting game differ from the original design you had in mind for it? This was his response. I don't remember the specific details of my plans for Fallout 2, but I do remember playing the game and seeing it was different from the storyline I had proposed for it. I think my biggest disappointment with the game is that each area was made in almost complete isolation from the others. There was no overarching theme and no attempt to make sure the different areas were cohesive. It felt like a lot of Fallout-y areas, placed adjacently and connected with the storyline. Those areas were individually well done, but they suffered from a lack of a strong central design. Now, success in the video game industry is a good thing. Of course it is. When you're a part of a team or you're in charge of a team and you finally release your product and it sells well or gets critical acclaim or both, it's a great feeling. But there's another side to it. Fallout was a critical success, and it was enough of a commercial success to get a sequel. This means that more people, especially the higher-ups at your company, want a piece of your pie. They want to get their hands on your project, they want to make changes, they want to interfere with your creative process, and this can become problematic. It became an issue for Tim Cain during the development of Fallout 2. At the beginning of Fallout 2's development, he was there and contributed to the game. He would not be at Interplay when Fallout 2 was released. In January 1998, him, Leonard Boyarsky, and Jason D. Anderson left Interplay and founded Troika Games. This was a huge risk. You have to understand. He left a long-time employer and co-founded a company. He left the series he was responsible for creating behind. He was the project leader and lead programmer on Troika's first game, Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura. Tim wanted to make a fantasy RPG. He wanted Arcanum to be set in the 14th century, but fellow co-founder of Troika Games, Leonard Boyarsky, suggested that Arcanum should be set in the 18th century. Not only that, he also suggested that the world should experience an industrial revolution. Think about that. A world where magic and technology collide. Guns, bombs, and traps versus magical spells. The citizens are confronted with new philosophies and ideas, and they have to figure out what to do. Certain races like gnomes and humans are more open to the ideas of technology. On the other hand, elves are perfectly fine using the traditional ways of magic. Things are changing in the world of Arcanum, but there's much more to it than just magic versus technology. It goes way deeper than that. There are more important things going on. Tim described Arcanum as a kitchen sink project. A project where he could throw all of his ideas into. And it was a unique concept. Think about it. This is a game where you can see an orc wearing armor and using a sword fighting a dwarf that uses a revolver or a grenade launcher. And you never know, a magic user could jump in at any point. The fantasy genre gives you a lot of freedom because you're not restricted to being realistic and you can try something different. Arcanum did that, mixing in fantasy with a small dose of actual history. The Industrial Revolution was a real event. We do have guns. But more importantly, this game is a mixture of fantasy and steampunk. For those of you that don't know what steampunk is, Oxford Dictionary describes steampunk as a genre of science fiction that has a historical setting and typically features steam-powered machinery rather than advanced technology. But not only that, you can tell that the developers were influenced by the Victorian era too. Just taking a look at some of the cities, it's pretty obvious. For the first 6 months of development, only 3 people worked on Arcanum. This was a very personal project for the members involved. It was a small team reminiscent of Fallout's development. This allowed them to put their ideas in without a publisher or the higher-ups meddling with their ideas. After all, they were the higher-ups. They founded the company. One important element of Arcanum is political issues and social commentary. It's necessary for a game like this. This is a world that is changing. Different philosophies are clashing with each other. Technology is introduced to the world, and citizens are right in the middle of these major changes. In an interview with RPG Codex, Tim explains his thought process behind this. Arcanum was interesting to us as a setting because it took a standard medieval world and added an industrial revolution. That event would certainly have effects on the different races and governments, so the exploration of the social and political upheaval in that setting again felt like something we had to do. Otherwise, the world would have felt static and not dynamic. Even though we were telling the player that the world of Arcanum was in the midst of drastic change, we had to show it, not just say it. The Arcanum team did not use a previous pen and paper rule set. They made a character system that reflected the setting. In Arcanum, there are 4 physical stats and 4 cerebral stats. The 8 stats are Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, Beauty, Intelligence, Willpower, Perception, and Charisma. Skills are divided into 4 groups: combat skills, thieving skills, social skills, and technological skills. The skills are Bow, Dodge, Melee, Throwing, Backstab, Pickpocket, Prowling, Spot Trap, Gambling, Haggle, Heal, Persuasion, Repair, Firearms, Picklocks, and Disarm Traps. On top of that, you have spell colleges and technological disciplines. The 16 colleges of magic are: number 1, Conveyance, deals with motion and transportation. Number 2, Divination, concerns itself with the gathering of knowledge through magical means. Number 3, Air, holds the spells that manipulate the first elemental material, that of air and wind. Number 4, Earth, the second elemental material, that of earth and stone. Number 5, Fire, the third elemental material, that of fire and heat. Number 6, Water, the fourth elemental material, that of water and ice. Number 7, Force, contains spells that manipulate and direct pure energy. Number 8, Mental, contains spells that influence and control the minds of their targets. Number 9, Meta, contains spells that affect other spells. Number 10, Morph, contains spells that change the subject of the target. 11, Nature, contains spells that control plants, animals, and natural forces. 12, Black Necromantic, contains spells that negatively affect the life force of a creature. 13, White Necromantic, contains spells that positively affect the life force of a creature. 14, Phantasm, contains spells that concern the control of light and illusion. 15, Summoning, contains spells that concern the summoning of creatures of progressive power. And the final one, 16, Temporal, contains spells that control the flow of time. And the 8 technological disciplines are chemistry, electric, explosives, gunsmithy, herbology, mechanical, smithy, and therapeutics. The Arcanum team were influenced by GURPS and other games, mixing in other ideas like spell categories and schematics with their own. Tim came up with the idea of Master Quest for your skills. This is a way to truly become experienced in your preferred skills. Another important element of Arcanum is how the world reacts. You have this interesting setting that is changing, but if its citizens remain static and uninvolved, what's the point? The Arcanum team made sure to let the player know that the world reacts to you, whether it's big or small. For example, there is a newspaper in the game that reacts to your player's actions. If you do something major, you will see it in the newspaper headlines. If you play a magic character, you can't use trains, but you can teleport. My first character was a dwarf that specialized in guns and traps, and he was not well received by magic users. I was told to leave shops, and just flat out disliked by a lot of elves. Character reactions are a big thing in Arcanum. There's a stat that's called Beauty. If you're an ugly motherfucker, a lot of people will notice that the first time they meet you, and they'll let you know, trust me. And that's just a couple of examples. There are a lot more out there. There are 9 races divided into 3 groups in Arcanum. I'm going to name the races and talk about the groups a little bit, just give you a little part of their lore. The first group, the Minut Races. The first grouping of Arcanum's intelligent peoples are the 3 which I have come to call the Minut Races, these being the dwarves and their cousins, the halflings and gnomes. The Minut Races are easily recognized by their stature, which never admits of a height greater than some 50 inches or 130 centimeters, even in the largest representatives of their race. They are also recognizable by the proportions of the body, which are somewhat different than those exhibited by humans and their kin. Minute people tend to have heads which are larger in proportion to the torso and limbs than one would see in a human subject. The limbs, especially the legs, are also shorter and thicker. The second group, the Gigantic Races. Ogres are the last survivors of a very ancient and potent magical working, which has only lately begun to wane, after having been initiated nearly 1 million years ago. Roughly 900,000 before the present day, the fossil record shows us a wild outburst of magical activity, an unprecedented surge of sorcery which affected life on Arcanum for millennia after. What caused this sudden cataclysmic storm of supernatural selection? We may never know for certain. All that we can say now is that the magical agencies at work at the time were enormously strong, far more powerful than the forces which any modern day mage can command. A great many organisms were created then which survive to this day, albeit in small numbers. In this distant epoch of enchantment, we find the origins of many legendary species, including the kraken, hydra, sea serpent, worms, dragons, and drakes were brought forth at roughly the same time. Many pre-existing species were substantially altered, as in this case of the unicorn and the firebird. Others were merged into chimeric organisms like the centaur and manticore, for reasons unknown. Humans, which predate this epoch by some 200,000 years, were not left untouched by the general pandemonium. Although the majority of our forebears went on unchanged, some of them were vastly transformed by magic. When the fantastic whirlwind of supernatural selection died down some 4,000 years later, 2 new species had emerged, and thereafter coexisted with ordinary humanity, these being the elves and the giants. True giants are no longer among us. We know that they existed. We can still see the cyclopean statues which stay arranged in the dark fens. If we care to travel there, and visitors still come yearly to the giant dance of Morabin to see the pillars they erected to mark the dawning of the midsummer sun. We have also found their fossilized remains, and 1 or 2 impressive skeletons have been assembled at Tarant's Museum of Natural History. But the giants of Arcanum left behind more than their bones. They still walk among us, in the form of their living descendants, the ogres and half-ogres. The third and final group, the Median Races. It is in the classification of the Median Races, orcs, elves, humans, and hybrids thereof, that my theories on natural and supernatural selection always meet with the most resistance. I have no illusions in this matter. The religious beliefs of many are at stake, as well as a host of assumptions which are regarded as unassailable truths by the vast majority of our civilization. Nonetheless, I am a man of science, as are my fellows in the fields of natural and supernatural history, and I must make my judgments based off evidence, not wishful thinking. It is, therefore, my painful duty to state that all the Median races, including the orcs and elves, are descended directly from human beings by a process of supernatural selection. The evidence which has accumulated in recent years through the science of paleontology and the art of forensic alchemy leaves this matter no longer in any doubt. Now, Tim and the rest of the team made sure to put a lot of choices in Arcanum and make it an open living world where you can go where you want. Tim had felt limited by Fallout's map, but now he can make the world as big as he wanted. And let me tell you, the world is vast. There are 3 islands, and the mainland is broken up into 5 parts, and the areas reflect the change that is going on in the world. Some areas have embraced technology, and they're industrialized. Other areas, they're more about nature. You see a lot of trees, and they don't want to deal with technologies. In some cities, you will see people using light bulbs and trains. This is a vast game, and there's a lot of different places to see. It's a big world. There are 3 different combat modes in Arcanum: turn-based, real-time, and fast turn-based. In a 2000 interview with IGN, Tim and Leonard explained their thoughts on this. The interviewer asked, "How have you dealt with the combat in view of the fact that gamers don't have specific control over the NPCs in their party?" Leonard replied, "We've dealt with it pretty well. I really like it. What we've done is we've made the AI understand how melee and ranged weapons and the spells that are in the game function. As for the technological disciplines, most of them come up more because you make something with them. Some characters also know how to use their items, so that's how they come across using technological disciplines. Tim Cain replied, "One thing I should point out is that we do have 2 modes to play the game in, with turn-based and real-time. So we added both, and it's interchangeable when you play the game, as we imagine some people will want to play some areas real-time and then switch to turn-based when they really need to do something more tactical." Arcanum has a lot of content and a high learning curve. There are plenty of companions scattered throughout the world with different alignments, and they react to your actions. Some party members might get pissed off with you at some point and leave or attack you. As Tim said before, this was a kitchen sink project. They threw all of their ideas into this. They put their hearts and their souls into this. This game was a project of love, and it was ready to come out in 2001. In Arcanum, you play as the only survivor of the IFS Zephyr. This was a luxury zeppelin that was attacked by 2 half-ogres. An old gnome that is minutes away from death gives you an old ring and tells you to find the boy. The zeppelin was traveling from Caledon to Tarant. You crash somewhere in between. You run into someone named Virgil, and he proclaims that you are the living one. And that's where your quest starts. You have to figure out the history behind the ring, the reason why the zeppelin was attacked, who the boy is, and much more. During your journey, you will find out a lot of history about the world and a lot of secrets. Arcanum was released in August of 2001, and when it came out, it had positive reviews. It received 2 Editor's Choice Awards from IGN and GameZone. It was praised for his in-depth character creation, his complex story and characters, and the way the world reacted to you. But this game was not without its criticism. It was criticized for being buggy, the graphics being a bit dated, and some people did not like the interface. Tim Cain actually admits that Troika games were buggy, so that was a problem. The biggest criticism I see for Arcanum is the combat system. It's criticized for being unbalanced and kind of boring. Some people say that the hybrid system is unnecessary, that they should have just focused on one system, either turn-based or real-time or something else. I agree with that. Arcanum's combat would have been way better if they just would have stuck with one system. They had all these ideas, and they put so much in there that unfortunately other things got neglected, or they just couldn't be balanced right. I don't think they neglected it, I just think that they were so busy putting in so many ideas that having a hybrid system did not play to their advantage. It was just unnecessary in my opinion. But overall, it got good reviews. You will see it in some people's top RPG list, including RPG Codex Top 60 RPGs. I believe it placed number 5 or 6. So it is remembered by some people. Unfortunately, it did not make nowhere near the impact that Fallout did. And over time, it's sort of become an obscure game. Not many people know about it, only die-hard RPG fans. And I forgot to talk about something earlier. Arcanum had multiplayer. You could join other people's games and join them throughout their quest. I say had because I don't know if it still works. I haven't played it, I can't play it, so I couldn't comment on it much, but just to let you know, it did have multiplayer. Arcanum was successful enough that the company at one point wanted to put out a sequel. Unfortunately, this never happened. We don't have that much info on it, so I'll just share what I can find. The sequel was supposed to be called Journey to the Center of Arcanum. It was supposed to be a first-person game using the Source engine. Tim actually commented on this, and I quote, "The sequel was based loosely on Jules Verne's A Journey to the Center of the Earth, where we plan to continue the adventures of the great explorer Franklin Payne. He has disappeared into the bowels of the earth, and his wife has hired you to find him. We had laid out most of the storyline, and it included finding prehistoric monsters, subterranean humanoids, and most thrilling of all, a clue about how magic and tech can be reconciled in the same artifact, something that most learned people had believed to be impossible. Of course, none of that came to be, but our talks about using the Source engine led to us making Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines." Now, at this point in Tim's career, he has officially been in the industry for over 10 years. He has more experience than that. Remember, in 1981 he was 15 and a company was trying to hire him, so he's been around for a long time. With Arcanum, he proved that he could still make enjoyable games. He didn't need interplay, he didn't even need to go back to Fallout. Even though he was responsible for its creation, he could leave it behind, co-found a company, and still make enjoyable games. But the next game he would work on would test his limits, mentally and physically. Troika's second game almost drove Tim Cain crazy. His partners Leonard Boyarsky and Jason D. Anderson were in charge of the last game Troika ever released, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. The people at Troika Games would run into a lot of problems while developing Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, but Tim Cain was in charge of Troika's second release, Dungeons & Dragons, The Temple of Elemental Evil. Troika had new publishers, Atari and Activision. Atari published Temple of Elemental Evil, and Activision published Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and they didn't give Troika the freedom that they had with Arcanum. Temple of Elemental Evil was an attempt to take the original Temple model, add in D&D 3.5 rules, and put it into a video game. This is a tough task. It's not easy to take a rule set and module that was made for tabletop RPG players with a dungeon master and make it into a video game. Temple of Elemental Evil takes place in Greyhawk. Greyhawk is a campaign setting in D&D. I'm not very familiar with D&D, so I'm going to use a trusted source to describe the setting. This is from sorcerers.net. And just a quick heads up before I start reading, I'm probably going to butcher some names, so forgive me if I do. Now, this is from sorcerers.net. At first glance, Hommlet seems like many other villages. It lies nested within the Kron Hills, 10 leagues south of the city of Verbabanik, somewhat east of the Lort Mill Mountains, and just west of the gnarly forest. The region is peaceful, fertile countryside suited to such pursuits as farming, herding, woodcutting, hunting, and trapping, so it was only natural that a prosperous little settlement should arise, located on a crossroads leading to the wild coast. Alas, many sinister characters and vile creatures were drawn there too, establishing a nearby community called Nob. In this iniquitous place, a chapel was erected, one dedicated to vice, damnation, and the worship of various immortal and malevolent deities. Over time, as more loathsome beings came to visit, it grew into the Temple of Elemental Evil, filled with dark priests and their corrupted servants. This was the setting for the very first module within the pen and paper Greyhawk campaign, which was introduced with the release of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set in 1985. Now, it is serving as the backdrop for Greyhawk, the Temple of Elemental Evil, a D&D CRPG being developed by Troika Games and targeted for release later this year. Temple of Elemental Evil was built using a modified version of the Arcanum engine. Originally, the team was given 18 months to complete the game. 1 year into development, Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 was released. This was a problem. They were almost done the game, but they were using D&D 3.0. Then all of a sudden, a new version comes out, which means they had to convert to a new edition and change a lot of things around in a short period of time to take out as many imbalances as possible. As you can tell, the team had a rough time developing the game. Troika wanted more time to work on the game so they can implement 3.5 rules, so they got 2 more months. This changed the development time from 18 months to 20 months. Tim wanted to take some classes out, but Atari refused and insisted they put all of the classes in. This means more work has to be done in a short period of time, and this is not the only time Atari interfered with development. Atari also wanted them to take out mature themes in the area Nob. Despite the short development time, interference by Atari, and changing the D&D rule set 1 year in development, Tim and the rest of the team were very dedicated to the game. Every week they spent time playing D&D to get a better understanding of the tabletop RPG. Tim loved working on his project, but it was very difficult for him. He explained in an interview how taxing it was on him. One event that I have rarely talked about is that during the 20-month development of Temple, I started feeling very sick, and it turned out I had a kidney stone that was failing to pass. I spent 4 months on painkillers while the stone worked its way out, and they certainly affected my work output. I am not putting it forth as an excuse for the problems with the game, but more as an explanation that while Temple's schedule was very aggressive, I was not up to the task. I should have asked for more time to complete the game. The main goal for the team was to successfully bring the Temple module into a video game with the D&D 3.5 rule set, and it was done well. According to reviewers and the general consensus of the fans, the combat and the way they implemented the rule set are the best things about the game, but that came at a cost. The story, dialogue, and characters were shallow compared to Troika's other games. There are 7 races in this game: human, elf, half-elf, half-orc, dwarf, gnome, and halfling. They wanted to add sub-races, but they didn't have enough time. You can create up to 5 characters or choose pre-made ones. At the beginning of character creation, you will choose what alignment your party is based on. Depending on your choices, your party will be restricted to certain alignments. Character creation is extremely detailed, and if you're familiar with D&D, you will know the system like the back of your hand. Stats, classes, alignments, deities, spells, features, and feats make up your character. Combat in Temple of Elemental Evil is turn-based. Personally, I'm very happy that they didn't go with multiple modes for combat. There are two game modes in Temple of Elemental Evil, Normal and Iron Man. Iron Man mode is for the people that want a true pen and paper experience. Tim explains Iron Man mode in this quote, "Iron Man is our approximation of true paper and pen role-playing. You make your characters like in normal mode, but you cannot re-roll the dice. You roll 4d6 and drop the lowest. Do this 6 times and then arrange the 6 stats any way you like. During play, you cannot make save games. If you quit, it automatically saves your game, and when you return to Iron Man mode, it picks up where you left off. If your party dies, that's it. Your game is over. You have to make a new party. If this sounds like a challenge, it is. See if you can play through the whole module in Iron Man mode. If it doesn't sound like fun, then play normal mode." Even though Tim was happy with their implementation of the 3.5 rule set, he wishes he could have made his own source material instead of trying to recreate Temple of Elemental Evil. After 20 months of development filled with sickness, interference from Atari, and many changes, it was ready to ship in 2003. Dungeons & Dragons: The Temple of Elemental Evil was released in September of 2003 in North America and October 2003 for Europe. Depending on your choice of alignment, you start off in different areas. You may start off killing innocent villagers, or burning a church, or witnessing a murder. It all depends on which alignment you choose, and there are different starting areas. This game features a unique user interface. If you right-click on a certain party member, you can choose all of your options from there, instead of going through multiple menus at the bottom of the screen. When it was released, it received good reviews. It was praised for its faithful implementation of the D&D 3.5 rule set and satisfying combat, which is really impressive to me, knowing that they had to change from 3.0 to 3.5 1 year into development, and they did it in a couple of months. Unfortunately, the game was lacking in story and dialogue, and it was criticized for that. And just like Arcanum, the Temple of Elemental Evil was released in a buggy state. Troika is known by its fans for releasing 3 unique games, but also releasing them buggy too. I'm kind of confused. I found patches that were described as official patches on websites I trust, but in a 2010 interview with Matt Barton, Tim recalls having patches ready to fix more bugs, but Troika wasn't allowed to release them. At first I thought it meant that they never released any patches, but it might be that they weren't allowed to release more patches. Despite its issues, Temple of Elemental Evil is regarded by many fans as one of the best D&D games ever due to its implementation of the 3.5 rule set and fantastic combat. Some say it's the best implementation of D&D in a video game. In its retail release, it sold over 100,000 units. Troika planned to release a sequel at some point, but that never happened. Tim tells us the details in this quote. "Yes, we had great plans for that engine. For the sequel to the Temple of Elemental Evil, Troika proposed using the super module GDQ, Queen of the Spiders, which consists of 7 modules from the popular Giants and Drow series, plus the special Q series module that completed the adventure. In fact, we were going to let the players bring their characters over from TOEE directly into the QOS, so they could simply continue playing with the same group of characters. Alternatively, we had suggested using the engine to create the long-awaited Baldur's Gate 3, and Obsidian had also expressed interest in licensing the engine to make D&D licensed games. Unfortunately, Atari never followed up on any of these proposals. Unfortunately, Troika never had a steady foundation. While the Temple of Elemental Evil team were going through their issues during development, the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines team were going through hell to try to finish the game. The TOEE team had to jump over to help finish Bloodlines. Activision and White Wolf were very involved in Bloodlines' development, even more so than Atari with Temple of Elemental Evil. They lost the freedom they had with Arcanum. Activision gave more money to Troika to finish the game, and it was finally released in November of 2004. I won't talk much about Bloodlines since this video is about Tim Cain. He was a co-founder of Troika, but he was really involved in Arcanum and Temple of Elemental Evil. He just helped the Bloodlines team finish the game. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is set in Los Angeles. In this world, demons, vampires, and werewolves exist among humans. This game is based off a White Wolf's World of Darkness setting and uses Vampire the Masquerade's tabletop RPG rules. Your character starts the game as a person that was killed and turned into a vampire, and you are brought before the Camarilla with your sire. A sire in this world is a person who is responsible for turning a certain human into a vampire. You are spared by the leader of the Camarilla, and your journey begins into the underworld of Los Angeles, where you will deal with different factions, different political beliefs, and different conflicts. There are rules you have to follow. For example, you can't expose yourself to humans. You can't let anyone know what you are. In this society, there are 2 sects, the Camarilla and the Sabbat. The Camarilla believes in following strict rules that they call the Masquerade, and they follow a prince. The other sect is called the Sabbat. The Sabbat have no empathy for humans and think of them as prey. They despise the Camarilla, and they are rabid and aggressive. In this game, you have to feed on people to maintain your sanity. Your character can go into a frenzy and start attacking random people if you don't look after yourself. There's also a humanity system based off your actions in the game. You can switch between third and first person at any time. Now, since I love this fucking game, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the 7 clans within this world. The Bruja. The Bruja are passionate idealists. At times, this passion can lead them to trouble since they tend to make their arguments with their fists and not words. Their rage means the Bruja start with -2 to frenzy checks, but they get 1+ to their unarmed feet. The second clan, Gangrel. If any clan were close to the beast, it would be the wildly nomadic Gangrel. Usually preferring to be loners, the Gangrel clan has recently severed its ties with the Camarilla. With their feral nature, the Gangrel are much more attuned to animals and have the ability to take on animal forms. Like the Bruja, members of Clan Gangrel receive a -1 to frenzy checks. When frenzied, the Gangrel receive a +5 to strength on top of the regular +5 that all vampires receive, as well as +5 bonuses to wits and stamina. The third clan, Toreador. The Toreador envision themselves as artists and visionaries. They seek the best of refinements, believe in being on the cutting edge, and wear an haute couture. With their close ties to human society, the Toreador can buy humanity at half the cost. Additionally, the Toreador gain or lose double the amount of humanity when committing acts that benefit or harm human society. The fourth clan, the Tremere. The least trusted of the Camarilla clans, the Tremere are blood sorcerers, using blood magic or thaumaturgy. The Tremere guard their secrets quite religiously and do not take outsiders into their confidence. Relying on their blood magic, the Tremere can only have a maximum of 4 for their physical attributes. The fifth clan, the Malkavian. Insane by nature, the Malkavians see the world in a different light than anyone else. This insight allows Malkavians to see the true intentions of others. However, it also means they have a much more difficult time communicating with others on occasion. The nature of the Malkavians give them a +2 bonus to the inspection feat. The next clan, the Nosferatu. Hideous and disgusting, the Nosferatu are cursed with a grotesque form. Forced into the shadows of the night, the Nosferatu have learned to adapt and hide from society. Due to their hideous nature, the Nosferatu start with an appearance of 0, and their seduction feat can never be any higher than 0. Relying on rats for blood, the Nosferatu get 3 blood points when feeding on them. And the last clan, the Ventrue. The leaders of the Camarilla, the Ventrue enforce the Masquerade. With their large bank accounts, the Ventrue have acquired quite expensive tastes. This allows them to gain easier acceptance into the Camarilla. However, they cannot lower themselves to ever feed on rats. The Ventrue are the only clan that can use Dominate to affect a conversation. You invest in attributes, abilities, features, and stats to shape your character. I said I wasn't going to talk much about this game, but here I am. I'm going on about it. It's just an awesome game. Anyway, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines was not a commercial success. It flopped bad, but it was a commercial success. You starting to see a trend with Troika games? It was praised for its fantastic atmosphere, voice acting, music, interesting world, and writing. Personally, I love this game. It's one of the games that really creep me out, and this has a ton of replayability. If you don't believe me, play as a Malkavian character, and then play as a Nosferatu. It's 2 different experiences. It's one of the most engrossing experiences in video game history. Like Troika's other games, it was criticized for having a buggy release, and Troika got a reputation for blaming publishers for their mishaps. In this quote, Tim Cain explains why he thinks it's unfair. Troika got characterized as always blaming the publisher when something was wrong, and I think this was unfair. We would always own up to the parts of the development process in which we had made mistakes, but it seemed that if we ever said we messed up this and our publisher messed up that, some people just heard the latter part of the comment and would start screaming, "Troika is blaming the publishers again." It got frustrating after a while, especially when I saw people at Troika quoted out of context, but I did gain quite an insight into the American political system, which seems to deal with the same kind of illogical, soundbite-orientated system of criticism of its political candidates. People hear what they want to hear, and often make up their minds before seeing or even in spite of any evidence to the contrary. Unfortunately, Troika was labeled as a developer that releases buggy games that don't sell well. Publishers didn't want to back Troika. After Bloodlines released, they laid off most of their employees. Only the founders remained. This would not be for long, though. Troika disbanded in 2005. I remember watching a Tim Cain presentation where he admitted that he wasn't much of a businessman. The founders of Troika were great at making games, but they could not manage a business. Even though Troika's games didn't sell millions of copies and released in buggy states, Troika's legacy is that of a company that released great games in difficult circumstances. Even though they were flawed, they had something a lot of games don't have nowadays: originality, passion, and a lot of ideas. Several projects died when Troika shut down. A spiritual successor to Fallout, Temple of Elemental Evil, and Arcanum sequels too. This is just speculation. I think if Troika never had their financial issues, maybe they could have bid for the Fallout license. I don't know if they would have gotten it, but I remember reading an interview where Tim Cain said he had a design and some ideas for Fallout 3, but he would never talk about it unless he got the chance to work on it. Anyway, Troika wasn't the end of Tim Cain's career. After Troika disbanded, he joined Carbine Studios and started working on something different: an MMO. Tim was already a fan of MMOs when he joined Carbine Studios, so it seemed like a perfect fit for him, and he started working on a secret MMO. He was promoted to design director in 2007, but he left Carbine Studios in July 2001. That secret MMO ended up becoming WildStar. It didn't take long for him to get hired. Just a short time after leaving Carbine Studios in 2011, he joined Obsidian Entertainment as a senior programmer. He was reunited with some of his old friends. And as of this recording in 2016, Tim Cain still works at Obsidian. He's been there for 6 years. He's worked on games like South Park Stick of Truth, Tyranny, and Pillars of Eternity. There's also a secret project coming up with him and Leonard Boyarsky. We don't have many details about it, but I hope to God it's a spiritual successor to Arcanum or something like that. I'm excited for it. And that, my friends, is Tim Cain's career so far. He is the godfather of Fallout and definitely a video game industry legend. I hope you enjoyed this video. My voice is about to go out, but it's worth it. Happy 20th anniversary to Fallout. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about this. Leave a comment if you want to. You know how to get into contact with me. Have a great day.